Hi, Kevin Kinnally here. A quick note before today's episode. You'll notice some static throughout the episode. Please accept our apologies. We will fix it moving forward, but we want to bring you today's episode. It's a good one, and we hope you enjoy it.
This is Delegate Brian Crosby from St. Mary's County, the Mother County, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, the best source of information on what's happening in Annapolis.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, we are back at the Mako mothership after recording remotely, and we have a very special guest today, but I know that there's something you'd like to address right off the top.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back, Kevin. Good to see you in person as well. And I will say, Delegate Lukey, kind enough, friend of the podcast, and
Yes.
kind enough to do an intro for us and gave us a few different versions, but he seems to have a bone to pick with my sense of humor. So, Kevin, I'm going to start us off today with a dad joke. Okay?
Gotta do it.
So I got a dad joke. It's one about a girl who eats only plants. And, don't worry. You've probably never heard of herbivore.
Ooh, herbivore.
Oh, no, okay. All right. Okay.
Delegate Lukey, that's for you. That's
okay.
for you.
So, on with the show. This really is not my strong suit, but, all right, Delegate.
Own it. Right. Okay. Well, today, as we mentioned, we do have a very special guest, and we're excited to welcome today P.J. Hogan. And P.J. Hogan, you wear multiple hats. You were among the last Republican legislators from Montgomery County. And today we'd like to talk to you about two things. Number one, your role as a member of the State Board of Elections, obviously a hot topic. And then also as an advocate for question 1 on the ballot. This is a fight that you have been fighting for years. And I have seen your passionate testimony many, many times. P.J. Hogan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Give us the nuts and bolts. What do you do in Annapolis? You're a man about town. We know we've been seeing you. Everybody's been following elections issue this year. I think more than every other year I've seen put together. So we've seen you, on the video meetings and so forth through that. You've become a little bit of an internet celebrity for your emotive expressions. But tell us a little bit of the P.J. Hogan story of how you got to be in all these stations.
Well, thank you. Mike Miller and the late Mike Bush called me, probably been 8 years, and said, how would you like to be on the State Board of Elections? We need you. I said, okay, fine. State Board of Elections meets once a month.
Right.
Fairly mundane.
Right.
Until now, until this year.
right until
it has been almost full-time, all-consuming.
At least once a week, right? I mean,
yeah, we've met at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, and just so many conversations outside of meetings. We've run 3 elections in 8 months.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
That's never been done before.
That's not what
During
we
a
do.
pandemic.
Right. Yeah. So this is like, when they do the degree of difficulty in Olympic diving and they say this is going to be like the triple twist with a double reverse, and then you're going, no, this is like that whole high end execute the hardest thing you can imagine. So
right.
you sell yourself short a little bit. I mean, you work with private clients in lobbying. We're happy to have you tell us about that. But your background as a legislator is a central part of why you were called upon for this role. I know, having worked in policy work in Annapolis for a long time, former Senator Hogan was always someone you can go talk to on the Budget and Taxation Committee, spent a number of years as the vice chair there, and did an awful lot of heavy lifting with Mako, but also with lots of other stakeholders on a wide range of issues. So no surprise that the presiding officers might go a little out of your comfort bubble and say, hey, this may not be your lane, but you'd be someone who would be productive there. I think that's borne some fruit in a tough year. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I might add that, yes, I spent 13 years in the state Senate and was Mako Man of the Year twice.
Oh, wow. See. Oh, okay. All right.
I see
Talking
the- I see
away.
the,
I have
plaques on the
great
wall.
pride of that recognition.
Okay, so let's talk elections. Again, we've covered this a lot on the podcast and on our blog, and all of the major news sources are covering elections right now. First of all, as a member of the state board, let's first talk about what does the State Board of Elections do. The State Board is really, it's the board members, and then you have a director and a professional staff. Talk a little bit about that and sort of the role of the State Board of Elections, which obviously right now has been elevated amid the pandemic.
Yeah, it's often very confusing to people, even to me. Everybody says State Board of Elections. Well, there's a board, 5-member board, 3 from the party of which the governor is, and 2 from the other party. And obviously that's changed over time. And then there's an administrator, deputy administrator, a whole host of staff, and they're often referred to as the State Board of Elections. And people get confused. Then you have the local boards of elections. We do everything from approving policies at the state level that then get passed down to the local boards of elections. We have to approve precincts, voting places, use of ballot marking devices, equipment distribution, really the whole gamut.
Right.
Trying to, and it's not always easy, trying to work in consultation with the local boards of elections, because they're really the ones at the ground level running these elections.
Right. So the counties run the elections. You all provide that guidance. And amid the pandemic, you were looking at all these maps with proposed locations for vote centers, right, and trying to make sure that they were dispersed correctly amongst counties and that there were enough voting centers to cover the population in certain areas, right? And that was seemingly an arduous process. I know there's a little bit of back and forth, but that all got done, right? So we're moving forward with this plan. And I guess we can talk, Michael, a little bit about the plan moving forward, but that's part of your role, right, is really just that check on the local boards to make sure that they're doing what they need to do to provide the opportunity for voters to vote amid the pandemic.
Yeah, the governor in his executive order wanted us to have all 1,800 polling places open for Election Day. And by working with the LB, the local boards, we determined at their information there weren't enough judges to staff that many. And they couldn't get all the facilities that they would get in a non-pandemic year.
Right.
And we said, no, we've got to do something different. And I'm not trying to take credit for it. I said, wait a minute. How many high schools do we have in the state of Maryland? Right. I literally, during a meeting, Googled how many public high schools in the state of Maryland.
It was
282.
Yeah.
I said, how about 200? How about let's use the high schools? People know where they are generally. They're large facilities. They're perfect places for it. And we put together a plan of using the high schools plus LB local boards if they wanted to use some other facilities in addition, whatever they could put together, and propose that to the governor, and he eventually agreed to that.
But I guess, what's wrapped up here is that the state board, as this sort of governing body and the body that comes up with these general policies, has really been leaned upon more this year to make the call and offer guidance and develop plans than really any time any of us can think of. Over the last couple of decades, we've gone through changes. We created early voting, and that required nuts and bolts implementation and where and how do you do the security and so forth. And that's, I'm sure, involved some guidance from the state board down to the local boards and staff who manage things day to day. But the series of undertakings this year, the springtime sort of elections, and now the general election collectively, it's just an awful lot of, because of the pandemic, because of the governor's executive order saying we need to do A, B, and C, and then multiple rounds of same. This has been a bigger task than you or your colleagues signed on for. I think you've proven up to the task, but it's been a pretty big lift. So I'm interested. It definitely, like this whole issue of having all these places, going from every single precinct to voting centers, part of this, I assume, was your colleagues all recognizing we're just short of judges. We know the demographics of the people who make themselves available on election day. They tend to be senior citizens. I mean, in substantial share, right? So you're just being prudent to be worried about that population when not only are we in a pandemic, but it's one where that population is more at risk of serious consequence than others. So we were having trouble getting people to sign up, and everybody's worried about getting them in place with enough protective equipment. So, some sort of compromise on number of locations seemed like an obvious place to land.
I'm also interested in bringing up the vote center idea moving forward. I mean, we've talked a lot on this podcast about what the pandemic has taught us and maybe some things that we're doing now that we'll continue to do that are changes from the way we used to do things. What do you think about the idea of maybe vote centers being the way we do things moving forward? So we don't have all these precincts. Instead, you have these centralized areas, these centralized centers where if you live in a county, you can go to any one of them. You don't have to go to your precinct. It seems like, we haven't seen it in action yet, but it seems like a pretty good idea moving forward. I mean, is that something that's been discussed, or is that something that's on your mind, when we get out of the pandemic?
It's on my mind for when we get out of the pandemic. It's not really been discussed much. Mm-hmm. So, I come to the State Board of Elections with, like you said, multiple hats. Mm-hmm. As a former candidate, I know what I want how elections should run. Mm-hmm. As a legislator, I know how I think the laws should be interpreted as far as election laws. Candidates probably historically they've wanted the precinct level because they and their volunteers can be at that precinct and they know that everybody coming to vote there are their constituents. Right. You go to vote centers. And you can go to any vote center in the county. You don't know who's your constituent, who's voting for you, who's not, not eligible to vote for you because they live somewhere else. But that may all change. I mean, who knows? It's up to the legislature. We may go to a vote by mail if that is a proven successful model, like the 4 or 5 other states that have been doing it for a couple of years. I mean, it just couldn't be easier. Legislators want to know precinct level results. Mm-hmm. And we're actually going to have that this year, which is why we're printing 13 million ballots that on election day and early voting can be tabulated by precinct level. So elections are much more complicated than people know or care to know. They really know, I just want to vote and my vote be counted. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, one of the things that you raised there is a couple times you've mentioned that the state board has a role here, but it's someone else makes the final call. So I'm intrigued by that. Like the idea that the governor's original executive order, and we had multiple steps this year, but at one point there was the open question, how are we going to conduct the general election for November? And how are we going to do that in light of what at the time seemed likely to be at least a lingering pandemic? And as we sit in October, that's proven to be the case. People are still worried. We are all masked up on our way into this building and around town Annapolis, and most of Maryland is doing the same. So the board weighed in on thoughts about how to do things. You got a lot of input, I know, from the Association of Local Election Directors and their concerns about staffing and safety. I know you heard from county governments on issues of cost, so you weigh all that sort of stuff. But it ultimately really was it's the executive branch. It was the governor who developed the plan through executive order. I honestly don't know structure of government. Was that just a function of because we're under an emergency declaration?
Yes, under emergency declaration, the governor can suspend statutes.
Lots
can suspend regulations, statutes. And the State Board of Elections had to suspend a lot of our regulations to fit with what we were doing. But, that final decision on would there be precinct level polling places or would there be vote centers was the governor's decision. The decision to mail out applications for ballots versus just mailing out ballots was the governor's decision. We mailed out ballots, people will remember, in the June 2nd primary. I thought it worked great. I pushed and pushed for us to do that for the general. The governor decided no, he wanted to mail out applications. That was an additional step, an additional cost an additional level of confusion to people. And that made things more difficult than I frankly thought it needed to be.
Well, particularly when we mailed you a ballot during the primary, and now you expect maybe to get a ballot, but you're getting an application. And
right. People get in the habit of doing things certain ways.
Right. And you talked about the cost. I mean, so the second mailer, right, so now we have an application, and then you can request a ballot. You would get a ballot through the mail. There is a cost associated with doing that, right? And you talk about everything from preparing the packages to the postage. There are a lot of costs there. County governments have said, hey, fair is fair. The state wants to do this. The state should pay for it. And again, we run elections at the local level, but we felt like that was a state decision. They didn't really consider county input. I know that the State Board of Elections agreed, and I think unanimously said, yes, the state should cover these costs. But again, ultimately, the decision rests with the governor under these emergency powers. So that all of these things, like you said, I think a lot of this stuff people don't think about, but there are, and if you look at your packets for your meetings, I mean, they've been getting bigger and bigger, but you get all these letters and you have all these concerns from, and valid concerns from different advocacy groups. But I know you've said before you couldn't sleep because you were really worried about what was going to happen. So at this point, though, we're moving forward, right? We have the plan and things are moving forward.
I feel really good about it. I'm not going to rest until, till whenever all the votes are counted. But we've mailed out, I think, as of yesterday, 1.5 million ballots, and there's still hundreds of thousands of ballots going out every day. You have until October 20th to request your ballot be mailed to you. We're going to have 8 days of early voting at 81 early voting centers around the state. Right. We're going to have, on Election Day, 319 voting centers will be open. As you mentioned before, you can go, if you're going to go and vote, you can go to any of those voting centers in your county. If you live in Anne Arundel County, you got to go to Anne Arundel County.
And we have ballot drop boxes all over the place, right?
And we've got 283 ballot drop boxes, which people have told me they love the ballot drop box. Yeah, with all due respect to the United States Postal Service, actually what you're doing is you're eliminating a step because you put it in the drop box. The local board of elections twice a day picks up that drop box, and they're the ones that are going to count the ballots. And speaking of counting, we authorized, this is one of my favorite things that we did. We said to the local boards, you can begin canvassing and counting the ballots beginning October 1st.
Which is huge.
But you have to keep them, keep the results confidential. They're embargoed until 8 o'clock p.m. on the 3rd. These states that aren't allowing their votes to be counted until after November 3rd makes no sense.
And that's really going to cause problems when it comes to determining the outcome in some states, right? I mean, you have all these ballots that have been mailed in. You can't even start to count them. I mean, imagine the process of waiting until the polls actually close on election day and start opening them up.
It's the battleground states for the presidency that seem to be the states that are delaying the count.
I mean, that's what 2020 is going to do, right? I mean, it's just going to be that year. So it's not going to be Idaho. It's going to be Pennsylvania.
But we have no control over Idaho or Pennsylvania or Florida. But no, I feel pretty good. I wish more people would vote by mail, and I hope people vote early and vote at off hours. Just don't wait till November 3rd. There's no reason to wait. I mean, unless you don't have your mind made up yet.
Right.
Well, that's its own thing. But I mean, so I would just say I've got my ballot filled out. I got mine sent through email and printed out at home. Got it in an envelope, and I'm going to walk it to a ballot box, to a drop-off box, which is a mile from my house. So that's a future exercise walk with my daughter. I'm looking forward to that. But that seems easy enough for me, right? I just haven't done it, right? I mean, it's literally sitting right next to my car keys. But anyway, that's why I'm waiting for a beautiful day and for my daughter to be free. That's right. So we'll dot those I's and cross those T's. I've been a what do we call it, like absentee on demand guy for years. So this option's been out there. Like I didn't need a letter to tell me I could request a ballot, and we ended up in a strange lane there. But I more or less join you in optimism that we've been pretty practical in how to do this, and I'm hopeful we're going to be one of the states that we're out of the newspapers. There are going to be places that are going to have trouble, or going to have really long lines, are going to have people who feel apprehensive about getting sick. And, all those things are probably going to happen to varying degrees in some places. And, let's hope we don't have Marylanders who feel like they can't participate. I mean, that's the worst thing that could happen is people end up being effectively denied their opportunity to participate. They see a long line and they're afraid to do it, right?
Right. And yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic too. I was a little concerned with the latest Goucher poll that only 50% of Marylanders said they plan to vote by mail. So that means that a lot of people plan on showing up either during early voting or on election day. So I'm hopeful more people will exercise that option. Again, you got to get it in by October 20th. So coming up soon,
your request,
ballot, right? Yeah. To get the mail-in ballots. And let's make one thing clear too. Even if the Postal Service, if there's a delay, as long as your ballot is postmarked by Election Day, it will be counted, correct? Yes. Even if it's not received on Election Day. Okay. I think that's a good point to make. I think that's a good place to leave it. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into another very interesting conversation. We'll shift gears and talk about a constitutional amendment, question number 1, that is going to be on the ballot this year. All that and more after the break.
This is John Frenay with Eye on Annapolis to let you know about our daily news brief podcast. If you want to keep up on Annapolis area local news, local weather, and local events, check us out. We produce episodes every Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. and deliver them right to your phone or computer for free. You can also catch them on our Facebook page, All Annapolis, or under the podcast category at eyeonannapolis.net. You can even ask Alexa to play it for you. So, if you want to keep up to speed on Mayor Buckley, County Executive Pittman, Navy football, maybe you're looking for a weekend thing to do, or if you just want to catch the hyper-local weather, give a listen to the Eye on Annapolis Daily News Brief. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
Welcome back to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally back here with Michael Sanderson, and P.J. Hogan is joining us today. On the front half, we talked elections, hot topic. Let's shift gears now and talk about question 1 that will be on the ballot before Maryland voters this year. It is a constitutional amendment dealing with the budget. P.J. Hogan, you have advocated for this question to get onto the ballot for a long time. Talk about what question 1 is and what it would mean moving forward if approved during the 2020 election by voters.
Sure, thanks. Okay, let me make sure. I'm removing my hat as Vice Chairman of the State Board of Elections.
Right.
This is my personal opinion, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the State Board of Elections. Question 1, in very simple, basic terms, it is a slight alteration to the Constitution regarding the state's budget. Right now, the governor of Maryland is the most powerful executive by budget authority of any in the country. Has been that way since 1916 or 1918. The legislature, governor submits a budget, legislature can only cut. They can't add money to the budget for an existing program or put in money for a whole new program. They can't move money around from one program to another. They can only cut. Over the decades and decades, they've said, okay, well, if we can't do that, here's what we'll do. We'll cut $10 million and we'll fence it off. And what they do is they say, Governor, you may only spend this $10 million for purpose X. So what happens is he either says, oh, yeah, okay, that's a good idea. I'll release the money, for that purpose. Or he said, nope, and it falls to the bottom line. It just falls to the state's fund balance, which
and like that informal process, which is more or less the way we've been doing things for, I don't know, the last 6, 8, 10 years, but that more or less replaces a more formal structured process that I recall where legislative leaders would approach the governor and say, we'd like to see these things in a supplemental budget. So please put some extra money in the budget as part of a negotiation. We're doing this. We think the plan will eventually look like that, but we need you to add stuff formally. This idea of take some money for one thing and fence it off and call it it's only usable for another thing is an indirect, sort of an oblique way of doing the same sort of thing. But again, we're working with the confines of a weird constitution.
Yeah, like I said, we're the only one in the country. I'll never forget, there was a great professor at Rutgers, ran the Eagleton Institute, Alan Rosenthal, and he used to come and testify on this bill. This bill has been put in, dating back to when when Senator Levitan was chair of Budget and Tax Committee. It has probably been introduced maybe 12, 14 times over a 40-year period. But Alan came and testified one time, and at the very end of his testimony, he said to the committee, he said, if you all would like to remain the weakest legislature in the country, don't pass this bill.
Right.
Which is effective talking to legislators. And you mentioned
But it didn't. It didn't move anybody.
I mean, you mentioned 1916. So the whole reason we're in this mess, right, is because in 1914, the General Assembly overspent the state's budget by like 8%, which was a financial disaster. There was a commission created, and they came up with this language, and that the General Assembly can only cut. They are the weakest legislature in the country when it comes to the state budget and the power over the state budget, absolutely. So this is now going to be a constitutional amendment on the ballot, but there is a trade-off for the governor, right? So you're not just saying the General Assembly has this new authority, you're also giving some authority to the governor, correct?
Yeah, the governor still will introduce the budget,
right?
Referred to as the executive budget. The legislature, and it must be balanced.
Right.
Okay, the Constitution currently requires the governor introduce a balanced budget. General Assembly will be, under this amendment, if passed, the legislature will be able to cut, will be able to put in money for a program that isn't currently in the budget, add to a program that's already in the budget. But they must, if the governor introduces a $14 billion budget, the legislature must pass no more than a $14 billion budget. It can't be a penny over.
Right.
So they have to reallocate. They have to set priorities, just like the governor sets priorities, and I respect him for that. The legislature just doesn't have a lot of say in those priorities, other than what Michael was saying before the budget's introduced. Legislative leaders going to the governor saying, "Governor, can you put money in for this?" And he does sometimes, doesn't sometimes. So they pass a budget that is no larger than the governor's budget. It must be a balanced budget. And then the governor will have line item veto authority over those items that the legislature changed.
Which the governor currently does not have.
Right. Now it's all up or down, whole budget.
Right. And I guess all that connects to sort of a balance of powers argument that if, under current law, if the governor put every single nickel that's in the budget was in the governor's original budget, then the governor shouldn't have another bite at the apple at the back of the process. So today, once the legislature is done taking some things out or whatever they're going to do, they can really just cut. Everything that's in there, the governor put in, so the governor shouldn't get an opportunity to say, well, now I'm going to veto the budget plan because everything was originally his. That's the current theory of balance. I guess the notion with what's in question one, if it were to pass, is if you grant the legislature the ability to effectively move money from place to place. It can't go over the original total, but if they cut here and they replace there or they add there, then the governor then can have some final say at the end, by way of a targeted veto on those items that were added by the legislature, which would be at least analogous in those areas to what most other states have.
Oh, yes. This puts us in line with basically all of the other states.
Almost everybody else.
And
right?
unless anyone have any confusion about this, there is no way that this is going to cause runaway spending. I want to reemphasize the point. It must be a balanced budget. In other words, the revenue projections must equal the spending projections. And there are 7 or 8 AAA bond-rated states. The other states that have AAA bond ratings, all have this ability. Okay,
more broadly than this amendment would, right? We're not even going as far as the North Carolinas of the world.
This is a baby step. Right? It really is a baby step, and it's not meant. It's not a partisan issue. In fact, if passed, it doesn't take effect until the budget for fiscal year 24.
So after
long after
current
Governor Hogan
gone.
is gone.
Right. And the other thing, so there is another check. So even if the governor has that line item veto, the General Assembly then could override that veto with 3/5 majority, correct? So there are multiple checks here. And, as you mentioned, every other state, essentially, the General Assembly, their assembly has way more power than does the Maryland General Assembly. So I know you've been advocating for this for a long time. I know Secretary Brinkley, when you left the Senate, he picked up this issue, correct? There's a long line, right?
Yeah.
Right. And Senator Rosapap, this past session, was the one who pushed it in the Senate. And again, passionate testimony from you.
I'll show you how nonpartisan it is. I put it in as a Republican with a Democratic governor, as a Democrat with a Republican governor, as a Democrat with a Democratic governor.
And what's the apprehension been, though, do you think, from the General Assembly to pass something like this?
It change is hard. People have come to get used to this is how it works. It ranges from, look, I'll go way back in time and not name names, but I had legislators that I was lobbying to vote for this who will say, you know what, I like the current situation. A group comes to me and says, we need $2 million for this, and he or she says to him, I'm fully with you. You get the governor to put the money in, and I'll support it. That's an easy way out. This would cause the legislature to make some priorities. Because if they're going to put money in Program X, they need to reduce money from Program Y. It's got to balance. It's not, and some people didn't like. They thought, well, this will put too much power in the hands of the two budget committees. Well, I submit that right now there's a lot of power within the leadership going to the governor and saying, put money in for this, and we'll help you on this piece of legislation.
I think there's also there's a more subtle argument probably against this that I think probably merits a little bit of weight, and that would be today the governor submits a budget at a certain level, and the only arrow with pressure on the total spending is downward. The legislature can cut, and in virtually every year, the legislature finds $100 million, $200 million, and the final product becomes effectively a bit less than what the governor had proposed. And to the extent, like if we were to rerun the tape on the last 20 legislative sessions, independent of party or the governor or the fiscal times, you certainly could see that if this power were to exist, rather than all those budgets in their final form being governor minus 200, they could have been governor minus 200, and then we add back 75 of things that we find to be legislative priorities. I mean, that happens in the capital side, which is different than the operating budget. We don't want to get too deep into that. So, I mean, I think if you're a really committed sort of starve the beast fiscal conservative and you want to see spending levels come down, I think there's still some argument that, okay, this leaves a window for less of that. And I think if someone goes all the way through that argument, I think that's a reasonable place to land here.
Let me play devil's advocate on that for a second. Okay, so you've got this spending affordability committee where the legislature meets, and this committee
with some citizens, as I recall, it's with more than just
citizen
legislators.
representation. Based on projections of revenues, they set what the spending level should be for the next fiscal year.
Right.
Doesn't bind the governor to that. So the governor either comes in at that level. Theoretically, the governor could come in over that level. Right. When he or she does come in over that level, and I've been in a situation where the governor did come in over that level, we cut down to the spending affordability committee level, or the governor can come in below that level. But your point about historically the legislature just cuts, so that drives down how much the state is spending. But almost all the time when they've cut, they've also fenced off money to say, spend it on this.
That's fair. I think that's fair. Yeah.
They're going to say, if they had this ability, they would say, look, Program X, we just think is overfunded by $5 million. And we think Program Y is underfunded, and we're just going to move the money over that. Governor, if you disagree, veto that. If we feel so strongly that's the case, we override the veto.
Right.
I just think it's a really kind of minor thing, more balance of authority between the two co-equal branches of government.
Right. I mean, I guess, so a variation on a theme and an argument that I would make that I think is a supporting argument for question one would be, I've been at the table multiple times in the Budget Reconciliation Act hearings, and there have times when we've argued against don't make a 10-year cut right now because of today's economy. If you need to cut for 1 year, do that, and then make the governor come back and ask for another budget reconciliation next year. And I know, Kevin, you and I both have been at the table saying we want transparency. You get process in the legislature. If you're a citizen or you're a stakeholder group like county governments, if a bill has to pass in order to cut something out of the budget, then I want to be able to come to that hearing and say why it shouldn't happen. I at least get my say. If they do it, they do it, but there's a public process there. The executive branch is not bound by the same kind of transparency laws. So if any governor, I mean, this is not a debate about the current governor. You've talked about
right.
You and supporters of this bill have been behind this for years and years, but any governor who's contemplating, I might do this or that in my coming year's budget, doesn't have to bring stakeholders to the table to say, I'm thinking about doing a little less of this and a little more of that. It's an executive privilege, and there's nothing wrong with that being a process of deliberation that doesn't involve the public. All things equal, I'd rather have the public at the table, and so this puts more of the final decision-making for fiscal issues in the legislature, where there's an open room, or in some cases going to be an open camera, and like folks like us can show up and say our piece.
Right. And so this Governor Hogan, often talks about mandated spending. He doesn't like it. What do you think this would do for mandated spending? I mean, this is one of the ways the General Assembly over time has tried to balance that power, where they'll say you have to put this much money in the budget for a certain program, and the governor has to do that. So what do you think this would do in terms of mandated spending? Do you still think we'd see that the level that we have, or moving forward, if there is more power to move money around, staying within, the governor's ultimate, the cap of the budget? What do you think about that piece of this? Is there an argument here either way on what it does for mandated spending?
I think it has the potential to reduce the number of bills that are introduced for mandated spending, because that's the only way.
Yeah, right now it's the only club we got in the bag.
I can't get the governor to put money in for this, so I'm going to pass a bill that requires. My problem with that, I mean, there are some things that really should, but maybe there are some others that shouldn't, and have that flexibility year to year, or a couple of years at a time. Maybe program X doesn't need $10 million every year. Maybe 1 year it needs 5, 1 year it needs 12. Times change. This pandemic has shown us all that things need to be a little different, and we need the flexibility. And the governor's been able to do that through executive orders and declaration of an emergency.
I mean, my general feeling is I think the newspapers and the various media organs have done a pretty good job saying, here's the wording of the question, and here's the sort of vanilla framing for what this is about. But I can't thank you enough for joining us today to give a little texture to that debate. And I think you're calling it baby steps, and not everybody's going to agree with that. But I think it's useful, and I think the Conduit Street Podcast audience is ready for the 301 and 401 level of what the politics and policy here is. So appreciate you walking us through some of that. It's interesting to see what'll happen on the ballot. I've been seeing advertisements supporting the other question, but not a lot of public debate on this one. I guess you don't have a whole lot of big moneyed interests who are
interested in question one other than us policy wonks.
Here we are. DraftKings and FanDuel, they're not lining up. And
no, they're on number 2, right?
They're on number two. All right. Well, thank you so much, and hopefully, you'll get the Irish caucus back together. I mean, once this pandemic. I mean, it was terrible timing, right? I mean, I think it was the day that was supposed to be the night, and then it was General Assembly, we're going home.
Everything's canceled.
But that's always fun. But thank you again for joining us. Anything you want to leave our listeners with in terms of the election? I know this is something you've been thinking about a lot. Any final thoughts from you before we let you go?
Yes, Michael Sanderson, please get off your butt, take your daughter, drop your ballot in the drop box.
Yes.
Everyone, please vote. Vote early. I'm not going to say
Not
vote
the other
often.
part. Not the other part. Right?
Vote early. Get it done, and then you can just relax and watch all the other states that are having disasters.
Right.
God forbid they have disasters, but I feel good about where we've done everything we can do. Now it's in the hands of the voters to vote, get it done.
Well, there he is, two-time Mako Award honoree, longtime senator, and still man about town, P.J. Hogan. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of the Conduit Street Podcast. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and of course, the Conduit Street blog. But for P.J. Hogan and Michael Sanderson, this is Kevin signing off, and we will talk to you soon.